Today I'm going to give you a demo and a walkthrough of my pedal board. It's taken me over an hour to set this up, and that's just because I wanted to get you the best quality audio as possible. Now I've got two lovely tube amps on either side. I've got a Fender bass break on that side and I've got a Marshall GSL-40C here, but I won't be using it unfortunately. They sound fantastic, but every attempt I made to capture this on camera was a disaster. So what I've decided to do is I'm going to run this pedal board into my DAW, and I'm actually going to use a virtual amp in one case, and in the other instance I'm going to be using an impulse response loader on my pedal board, so it'll go XLR out directly. So before we get started, I'm just going to walk you through the setup. I've got my TU3 tuner going into a Klon Overdrive for those really buttery, smooth, creamy overdrive tones. This is one pedal that it just flatters most of whatever's in front of it, so I like having it on the board. I might use it now and then, especially for, you know, like a Pink Floyd solo or something that just needs that additional glue. Then I've got a Super Overdrive, which is basically a mid-boost tube screamer kind of circuit. So that's used to push tube amps and just get them more mid-focus, tighten up the low end, etc. Next on the board I have a Super Overdrive, and that's basically a mid-boost and kind of tighten up your tone. So I find that very helpful, and I don't go level up totally in drive zero, but I'm more kind of centered around the middle. I've got two setups actually because of where I play, and one amp is almost like a Fenderish clone. It's the Trainer YCV40. If I'm playing classic rock, even though I dial in the gain channel, it doesn't have that bite or that volume. And because of that, I decided to go in for a Plexion Rocker, which is basically a Plexi in a box. It's got that little Marshall grit and really does the job if you dial it well for the amp. Next in the chain I've got an Extreme Metal. That was just something because I wanted to try out. I don't know how often I'll use it, but it's nice to have that distortion if and when I need it. And then finally, before it hits the amp, I've got a noise killer. So if I were playing this with a traditional tube amp, this would be going right into the front of the amp. And then the upper row would be what goes into my effects loop. My effects send would normally be the Super Chorus CH1. It's a fantastic pedal. Then going into my digital delay, the DD6, which has got more features than I require. Now I'm recently intrigued with this Mini Universe pedal. It's got some really nice reverbs, which we'll go through. I don't know if you remember, if you're a long time viewer of the channel, but I built this basically like an AB box. I just 3D printed this little contraption and did some basic wiring, and you'll be surprised, but it still works perfectly fine and there's absolutely no problem with it. And I'm using it here because normally I'd like to send my reverb back to the effects return on a traditional amp, but I'm not using the amps here, and I could do some more complex routing on my DAW, but I decided I didn't want to go through the hassle. So what I have going right now is my reverb is going into my splitter, and then that splits the return, one going directly as an input to my VST amp over there. So it's basically all the pedals in series going back into the amp, and then I have the same reverb going into this IR cab loader box, which has its own amp loaded in it. So I've basically got two channels running in my DAW, and I'm going to turn that on for recording. This is my clean. I'm using this lovely telly. So that's my clean channel. And what you're hearing is actually two amplifiers. One which is, I would say, as close as I could dial my Trainer YCB40. So it's basically a black face amplifier with a 1x12 cab. And then I've got something similar going on this box. So what you're actually hearing is 2 amps. We'll start with the cleaner demos because I just think you'll hear them better, and then we'll go through all the drive pedals. So if I turn on my chorus, with the delay, and if I engage this mini universe, it's got so many tonal variations here. I could be here for the next hour and still not even cover this pedal. But just to go kind of extreme on what it's capable of. And you can dial in the mix, how much of wet dry you want. Tails just go on as long as you want them to go on, so it's just fantastic, you know. I don't know how often I'm going to use something like this, but it's kind of cool to have. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch off my effects loop. This box is very cool, by the way, because I can change the amps. Okay, now let's check out all the drives. So, clean. Now it doesn't sound that great on its own, but let's engage the Plexi now to get that martially tone going. And if I turn on the Klon now, so you can hear how that actually kind of smoothens things out. I also have a noise killer because, as you can hear, you know, that takes care of that annoyance, especially when you have more than one drive on, or just the Plexion Rocker, because that is pretty loud, and I have to keep it kind of at that level just to match the output. I could turn it down when I'm playing with real amps. Perceived volume versus actual volume, right? So I'm going to go through the next pedal and then I'll switch guitars to humbucker. So here's the metal, the extreme metal. And if I use the SD1 now, that's a lot of gain. So just don't do that. You can't have 4 pedals going into each other because that is overkill. Okay, let's swap this out. If I use the Plexi, so the Boss pedals are great. They are what I would say permanent on this board. In fact, I have an OC2 as well, the octave pedal, but I can only connect 10 pedals at the moment because of my power supply. So I removed the OC2, and the pedals I'm really quite intrigued to really master, and which I think I've got a lot of potential, the reverb, because it's got so many options out there. The IR box, which is right now on the default cab sims. I want to actually load my own custom impulse responses and you know, play around with it and see what I can come up with. My intent is to actually use that when playing live, because maybe I don't need to lug one of these heavy amps around. I'll just go straight into the PA. The Plexion Rocker is kind of in that gray area for me because it does work, but it's not going to sound exactly like a real amp. So I need to really try and dial that in to a point where I can just turn it on and forget about it. Almost like, hey, that's my default classic rock amp in a box kind of thing, you know. There was one point I wanted to talk about which I thought was very interesting and informative. In case you ever run the Boss pedals in stereo, you have to actually use the outputs, because if you don't, and for example if you connect output A and B to input A and B of the next pedal, and then you only go output A mono, things are going to sound wrong, you know. It's going to sound like half the pedal is functioning, and you might actually think my pedals are gone, you know, they're dying, or they're not getting enough voltage. So that's something I learned, you know, the hard way. I was like really panicking and thinking, oh God, I've gone and destroyed the pedals because I just got a new power supply. But that's not the case. So I hope you found this video helpful, guys. If you did, give it a like. Consider subscribing. There's more content coming up. And with that, I'll see you on the next update. Bye now.